Hello and welcome back to another edition of Stirring It Up with Tia Monique, Kitchen Table Talk. And on today's episode of Political News, we're listening to Robert Orustein describe the new Republican Party. So sit back, listen, and let's talk about it on the other side.
Well-respected centrist scholars Thomas Mann and Robert Orustein published a book titled It's Even Worse Than It Looks. It blamed growing political polarization for jamming up the American system of government. That wasn't controversial, but their explanation for the polarization was both sides were not equally to blame. The Republican Party, they wrote, has become an insurgent outlier, ideologically extreme, unpersuaded by conventional understanding of facts, evidence, and science, and dismissive of the legitimacy of its political opposition. It should have been obvious. Since Newt Gingrich's 1994 Republican Revolution, the GOP has become the party of feelings over facts, of shouting over negotiating. By 2012, the GOP was already welcoming in Tea Partiers, militiamen, and nativists. All of that preceded Donald Trump. Republican politicians were already denying climate change. They denied evolution. They denied that Barack Obama was born in America. You should keep all of this in mind today, as Republicans deny that Joe Biden defeated Donald Trump. Many still haven't openly denied it. The vast majority of Republican senators haven't said anything. You could fill a TV screen with headlines about the GOP's silence on the election. And we did. Here it is. But this silence is actively giving credence to the president's lies. It is, in fact, an attack on the very fundamentals of American democracy. It's all the more outrageous when you learn what these Republicans say behind the scenes, like Ron Johnson of Wisconsin, a top Trump defender in the Senate. Here he was a week after the election.
Senator, have you congratulated Vice President Biden yet?
No.
Why not?
Not at all. But this week, a former Republican official says that in a phone call, Johnson told him, quote, Donald Trump is an a-hole. Johnson reportedly added that Biden won and that the election was fair, but to say it out loud would be political suicide. That backs up what the president-elect told Jake Tapper on CNN last night.
Oh, I say this tactfully.
You don't have to be tactful.
No, I do, because I don't want to. There have been more than several sitting Republican senators who privately called me and congratulated me. And I understand the situation they find themselves in.
I wonder if one of those profiles in courage was Ron Johnson. It probably wasn't Senator David Perdue of Georgia. On Fox News yesterday, Perdue said this.
President Trump's very frustrated. I'm very frustrated. And we're going to do everything we possibly can to make sure that whatever anomalies are uncovered in November don't happen in January. This is what President Trump said from the beginning. We want every legal vote counted properly. We want every illegal vote eliminated. That's all we want.
But on Wednesday, in a private Zoom meeting with the Republican Jewish Coalition, a recording of which was obtained by the Washington Post, Perdue left little doubt as to who won the election.
We know what this change of command at the top will mean with our foreign relations. If we can keep the majority in the Senate, we can at least be a buffer on some of the things that the Biden camp has been talking about in terms of their foreign policy.
And while campaigning with Mike Pence today to save his political life, he mentioned Chuck Schumer and AOC, but did not mention the president even once. Look, liberals often get accused of showing contempt for Republican voters, but no one shows more contempt for Republican voters than Republican politicians who say one thing in public and something completely different in private, who let Donald Trump try and undermine what they know to be free and fair elections, and have helped him pocket nearly $250 million in pointless donations in the month since he lost. Whether it's fear of their base or fear of the president, Republican politicians are engaged in a war on truth itself. And we can laugh, we can mock them, we can roll our eyes. But here's the big question. How exactly can America's two-party system of government survive when one party is so openly detached, not just from democracy, but from reality? Joining me now is the co-author of that 2012 book, That Warning, and an expert on all things GOP, Norm Ornstein, resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute. Thanks so much for coming back on the show. Norm, when you and Thomas Mann wrote your book 8 years ago, did you ever imagine the GOP, which you had already back then identified as extremist, as an insurgent outlier, would end up denying and trying to overturn the results of a free and fair US presidential election?
No, I didn't think it would get this far. And your point, I think, is the most significant one. It's not just that we've had a Donald Trump. And, you know, the conditions that brought a Trump were there before he arrived, and many of them will be there after he's gone. It's been the complete moral cowardice, the abject failure of the overwhelming majority of Republican elected officials around the country, the only exceptions at this point being a handful of governors and especially some of those election officials. But the majority leader of the Senate, the leadership otherwise in the Senate, and not just in the couple of days after the election, you have a president who's threatened directly the Republican Secretary of State and election officials, call them the enemy of the people, and there's radio silence there. This is a cult, maybe, and the fear of being shunned, that's what you see with Ron Johnson, overwhelms everything. But the lowness to which they've sunk, I don't know if anybody could have imagined it this bad.
So you don't buy the idea that these are poor, powerless Republican senators, some of whom I assume you know personally, who have clearly been forced against their will, Norm, to be supporters of authoritarianism and conspiracy theories. Surely we must feel sorry for them.
I do not feel sorry for them, and I've lost a lot of friends. I will tell you, Mehdi, Tom and I were around 50 years ago. I could give you a list of Republicans in Congress and in administrations we worked with that would fill a book, but not anymore. It's just become not just a farce. This is a direct threat to every principle of American governance. And I don't accept excuses for this. It's one thing if you're just trying to avoid a primary and maybe you curb your rhetoric a little bit. Look at what's happened over the last 4 years. No oversight of the rampant corruption in the administration. Nothing said about children ripped from their families and deliberately kept apart from them. All of that. And now basically trying to blow up our election system and our democracy. How can you excuse any of it? I can't.
No, indeed, and neither can I, and no one should. As we mentioned, Mike Pence was in Georgia today. Vice President Mike Pence campaigning for David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. I want to play you a bit of his stump speech. Have a listen.
I know we've all got our doubts about the last election. And I actually hear some people saying, just don't vote. If you don't vote, there could be nothing to stop Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi from cutting our military, raising taxes, and passing the agenda of the radical left. Know this. We can fight for our president, and we can fight for more Republicans in the Senate at the same time.
So the Republicans are all over the place with these narratives now. On the one hand, the election is rigged and President Trump will win re-election. On the other hand, make sure you turn out to vote in a rigged election as a check on a Democratic administration. I mean, it's just weird how the conspiracies and the rationalizations, where it's got them.
You know, there's a circular firing squad out there. The thing that usually happens with Democrats, I had to laugh at the attempt to do a Southern accent by Mike Pence, but clearly they're trying to thread a needle here, where you have a president who's attacked the Republican Party, attacked the Republican governor and officials there, his lawyers saying you shouldn't vote, great divisions in the party, and they're trying desperately to try and put some tape over the holes that they've drilled in their own wall.
Indeed. Let me ask you this, Norm. All of these polarizing trends, the extremism, the refusal to compromise, the denialism, the affinity for conspiracy theories, the conviction that Democrats are trying to destroy America, they're all kind of Marxists in disguise or communists. What was the underlying driver or drivers of that back in the 1990s and early 2000s? And what is it now? I mean, what is driving this stuff? How do we deal with it?
So keep in mind that some of the roots of this go back way further. If you look at some of the loony right back in the era of Taft, when you had a kind of movement to overturn what was then the establishment moderate liberal Republicans, we have some of those roots. You have the roots of racism going back a significant amount of time. A lot of the racism that was in the Democratic Party in the South switched over to the Republican Party. But Newt Gingrich, as you said earlier, is a pivot point here. When we write the history of this, Newt deliberately moved to a tribalism in our politics. And it worked for him. He became the speaker. But that, along with the development of talk radio and then the tribal social media, has made it so much worse. Now, you could look at all these bizarre conspiracy theories out there and the rank racism and say, well, people have been lulled into believing this stuff, but they're turning eagerly to things that repeat what they believe, and it's spreading in a fashion that is so damaging to the fabric of the society. And let's face it, let's look ahead a little bit. We know that one sort of loony Republican, Mo Brooks, a member of the House, has said that he's going to contest some of these electoral votes on January 6th when the new Congress meets. If one senator does so, then they have to vote in each House on the electoral slates. What's going to happen if most of the Republicans basically vote that Joe Biden is not the legitimate president and half the Republicans in the Senate? How do you work together? How can you begin to solve those problems? And if half the country believes that wearing masks is an attempt to take away their freedom, which is what they're promoting now as well, we're going to have even greater difficulty just pulling things back together. It's just horrible.
Horrific indeed. And Norm, you mentioned talk radio and social media. One last question. You've also written about how Republicans exploit the media's desire for objectivity and the whole false equivalence narrative. When reporters tried to play kind of both sides, when they get trashed as lying liberal media, and now when they tell the truth about what Trump is, they're suddenly leftist, activist journalists. So what does the media do to kind of not just shake the stigma that Republicans have placed on them, but to identify, as you did 8 years ago, that there is no both sides here?
And we still have headaches with mainstream media. There's still this desire to avoid being attacked for liberal bias. And it means bending over backwards to say that both parties are the same. What we're also going to see, and we're already beginning to see it, is they're going to use a double standard when it comes to looking at Biden, where they ignored what was the equivalent of assault and battery on the Constitution and rank corruption with the Trump forces. It's going to be any jaywalking event that occurs in the Biden administration, they're going to take it to DEFCON 1. We need a real reconsideration by mainstream media of how they handle the parties, because if you distort reality, you're not doing the business that you're supposed to do. It's not reporting both sides, it's reporting reality. And we're still a long ways from getting that in our mainstream press, and it's exploited by the right. Before I go, I just want to say thank you for bringing on my friend and longtime buddy, David Mandel, really Veep was the leader here in pointing out what reality would be. And I worked on that show a little bit.
Thanks for watching another episode of Stirring It Up with Tia Monique. So now, what do you think about the new Republican Party? I know that I have been harassed and have been talked to crazy. What about you? Please let us know in the comment section, what do you think about this whole situation? And if you enjoyed this video, please hit the like and subscribe to become a friend. And until next time, and there will be a next time, bye.